The biggest one-day wipeout in stocks since COVID after those Trump-shaped tariffs. How do global leaders negotiate with an unpredictable president? And in the UK, are concerns that online safety will be the price of a deal wide of the mark? We'll talk to the father of Molly Russell, who took her own life after viewing harmful content online. Good evening, this is Newsnight, brought to you live every weeknight across the UK and around the world from Broadcasting House with the best insights and interviews. Before 11, we'll hear from Irish trauma surgeon who's recently returned from Gaza. He tells us his account of conditions in one hospital. So, after that announcement by Donald Trump, US stocks have suffered their biggest one-day tumble since the start of COVID. Here, the government has taken the first technical steps towards introducing retaliatory tariffs, though Keir Starmer is making clear he'd much rather agree an economic deal with the US as a way of diluting those tariffs. There's been speculation that he's prepared to water down online safety as the price of a deal. I have been told that will not happen. We'll talk to the father of Molly Russell, who still has concerns. First, let me introduce my panellists. Camilla Tominey, polymath, writer and podcaster, and Imran Ahmed, founder of the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, an anti-hate organisation who's currently involved in a legal battle with Elon Musk. Now, in the last hour or so, Donald Trump has been talking about those tariffs on Air Force One. He is heading down to Miami. He was interestingly asked a question by the BBC. Question about the Chagos Islands, but the president, what did he do? He pivoted his discussions with the UK about tariffs, and this is what Donald Trump said about Keir Starmer. I think Keir Starmer, was very happy on how we treated them on tariffs. Just to recap, the baseline was set 10% on all countries. That's the lowest level. That's what we got. The EU got 20%. We'll get to that later on. But Imran, your thoughts about what Donald Trump says? Keir Starmer must be very happy.
Well, I think Keir Starmer's done a good job of trying to find ways in which we can work together. And there's always going to be areas of mutual concern between the United Kingdom and the US, in particular in security. And we've had that long-standing relationship. And to his credit, when necessary, the Prime Minister has stood up, for example, to JD Vance, telling him that actually when it comes to freedom of speech, Britain, you know, they always like, the United States likes to believe that they invented freedom of speech. Milton, Locke, these were Brits, not Americans.
We always thought he was very cerebral. You're also very cerebral, Camilla. What do you think of the president's assessment that he's treated Keir Starmer?
Well, we've got the same deal as the Taliban in Afghanistan, I believe. 10% is clearly preferable. From a mathematical point of view to the EU's 20%. Is it down to Keir Starmer's sort of advanced negotiating skills? I'm not so sure. I think, you know, it was an algebraic calculation that was made by the US. We saw it written up on the board, and that's how it's been delivered. We're going to get on to the Brexit positioning of all this. There is an irony that a Romaniac Prime Minister has ended up being benefited.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
From the EU.
But Imran, let me just...
But I'm sorry, but who would you credit then? And look, here's the thing. The Prime Minister's in charge right now. We know that he's had an interesting few months with the President of the United States. It is actually a difficult relationship to negotiate. I think credit should be given where it's due.
To the King?
But Imran,
for extending that invitation.
But Imran, you live in the United States.
I live in Washington.
You live in the United States. You've watched that stock market collapse. Well, not collapse, but a big fall today. Do you think Donald Trump will look at that and be nervous, or will the disruptor-in-chief say, that's how you change the economy?
Well, here's the thing. I live in the United States, and as someone that wishes to retire at some point in the next 20 or 30 years, my 401k has taken a real battering today. And no one can be happy about that. Algebra, mathematics are not a socialist plot. There are the rules of gravity, and if you destroy everyone's 401ks, if you annoy every single American person, you're going to pay pay an electoral price for it.
OK, Brexit. So last night on Newsnight, I reported how we had a much lower rate of tariffs than the EU, and a Brexiteer texted me and said, Nick, you've got to report that Keir Starmer moved heaven and earth to stop Brexit, and look what happened. He's benefiting from it. I can report that Brexiteer was Lord Brady, Graham Brady.
Was it Bill Cash, Jacob Rees-Mogg, or one of the other
Chairman of the 1922 committee in the last Parliament? Tell me about Brexit.
Well, to be fair, I think clearly since 2016 we've been promised to maximise our post-Brexit opportunities, and I don't think that's been realised for very many different reasons. The Brexit wars of 2016 to 2019, COVID and all the rest of it. At the end of the day, we have been given some degree of preferential treatment because we are not in the EU and not associated with their protectionism. Equally, it could be down to the invitation that's been extended by Buckingham Palace. It could be down to him being an Anglophile and the fact that he loves Britain and wants to visit here and enjoy it here and has got golf courses here and all the rest of it.
Did we notice Imran?
But it is there's a Brexit effect to him.
He's not impressed.
There is a Brexit effect.
Generous, Camilla. Look, I agree with you.
Be generous
His
to
Majesty
Brexit.
the King.
Be generous to Brexit.
So let me be generous to Brexit right now. The Online Safety Act, for example, the UK's world-beating legislation that came out before the European Union's Digital Services Act, at the time I said that was part of the Brexit bonus. We were able to decide our own policies on how we want to protect the British people. And I think that was a good idea. It was about digital sovereignty and about making sure that we weren't held hostage by US algorithms. Brilliant thing. This moment now, 10% for the UK, 20% for the European Union, you're absolutely right. But please be generous in response. Of course His Majesty the King should be commended. Of course some of the policies of the last government should be commended. But right now, he's in charge, the Prime Minister, the buck stops there. We know that he's done some quite interesting shuttle diplomacy in the last few months. So let's extend him that benefit
I know, let's extend him that benefit, but let's be honest, the pitch rolling for this by Labour in opposition was appalling. It didn't take a genius to work out that there was a chance of a second Trump presidency. Labour spent all of that time, and I'm talking about Foreign Secretary David Lammy, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan and others, absolutely trashing Donald Trump. Meanwhile, they get rid of Karen Pierce, who apparently has done a lot of groundwork for these negotiations, replaced her with a political appointment in Peter Mandelson. That's not sensible. They got rid of Crawford Faulkner, who was trying to lead trade negotiations for Britain with the US and the rest of the world. So, yes, he's had to make up for lost time. He's had to make up for bad diplomacy.
We must move on. But what I can say after those exchanges between Camilla and Imran is I think we can now, on Newsnight, formally declare an end to the Brexit war.
Never.
Now, the government is facing a dilemma. Newsnight has been told it has no plans to water down online safety regulations to appease White House concerns over free speech. But ministers are keeping their counsel to avoid provoking the mercurial President Trump, a silence that has alarmed campaigners. One person with deep concerns is Ian Russell, whose teenage daughter Molly took her own life in 2017 after viewing harmful content online. Ian, you're at the centre of a sort of a delicate diplomatic dance. You're hearing what the government has told me, but there's silence. How do you feel about that?
I think today has left me feeling dismayed, appalled, quite frankly. And I think it's up to the PM to urgently clarify what is going on. And I think he should be listening to what the UK public are telling him. He seemed to at the beginning of the week when he was talking about adolescence and what an effect it had on him and his family. He should be listening to the British public rather than the waves of politics coming over. Recent polling that the Molly Rose Foundation has done showed that parents in the UK don't think our online safety laws are tough enough by a ratio of 9-1, and they would want improvements in that, tougher laws, even if that meant less investment from tech platforms.
I mean, it's interesting because, as I understand it, the government is doing these very delicate negotiations, and their argument will be, if there is an attempt to do this from the United States, they'll say, look, the online safety bill is about stopping criminal behaviour. It's stopping children seeing violent and pornographic content. Surely that's what Christian conservatives would support in the US. Are you pleased to hear that, or are you concerned that you're seem to be not really know what's going on.
I'm concerned that we don't know what's going on. I'm concerned that it's taking too long. The establishment and the pace of change in the establishment just cannot keep up with tech. Tech moves at lightning speed. The world is moving really fast. Only in January of this year, probably prompted by his closeness to the new US regime, we had Mark Zuckerberg saying that Meta would catch less of the bad stuff. Now, there is research in this country that shows that young people between the ages of 10 and 19 choosing to end their lives, dying by suicide with a connection to online content at roughly the rate of 1 a week. We cannot keep waiting for change to come. There will be too many more people like Molly, and there are too many other families that I know and I have met. And in some senses, I can feel a rising anger in me. I don't think anger does any good, and I try not to be angry about this. But I know that amongst the bereaved families who have experienced the consequences of not regulating these platforms sufficiently enough, there is a rising anger, and we need to strengthen a structurally imperfect act that we know about, and we need Ofcom to do something that is less timid. It's been so timid in the implementation of that act. We need things like that to happen, and they need to happen quickly to combat that dreadful ticking clock of one young person a week in the UK.
Camilla, rising anger from Ian. You're a parent.
Completely understandably. I mean, I think why Ian's story resonates, and indeed why adolescence resonated, is because as a parent, as a mother of 3, you look at both situations and you say, there for the grace of God go I. Okay, the priority in this legislation shouldn't even be parents, it's the children. Children and parents should take priority over tech giants. I genuinely feel like we sort of chickens are coming home to roost on this. We did this huge smartphone experiment. We've noticed all of the data since 2010 pointing out that technology has made our children more anxious, given them more mental health problems, made them sadder, eroded their confidence, eroded their ability to have relationships with others. It's the whole Jonathan Haidt argument. You know, we've overprotected them in the real world and underprotected them in the online world. And I've never been convinced that the Zuckerbergs or others of this world really ultimately care about the harms they cause our children. That's the truth of it.
So what do you think? What do you think when you hear Jonathan Reynolds, who said today the US is not seeking to make our children unsafe? Because to me, that's ill-informed or misguided or both. I mean, that's just dreadful.
I think the algorithms of these platforms are absolutely designed to harm our children, and whether it's with pernicious content like your daughter Access, or actually just brain-frying nonsense, you know, it's never ending. That whole thing about Instagram, you can't catch up, you can never catch up. It is sucking everything from their minds, and I think it's really dangerous.
Imran, let me ask you, you live in the US, you've had run-ins with Elon Musk, he is still for the moment influential in the White House.
Yeah.
Do you think the UK government is right that the online safety bill, all of that will be completely safe from him as a free speech campaigner?
Look, I mean, look, Elon Musk is a free speech campaigner who also sues organisations like mine. He sued my organisation and he lost that litigation.
He is appealing.
He's appealing, but the court ruled that he was actually trying to silence us by using strategic litigation to do so. And quite unusually, a court awarded us costs in the US, which is incredibly unusual. He's appealing, and we are very confident that we'll win that too. But here's the thing. What we're talking about here is platforms that... We did a study last year, Deadly by Design, looking at TikTok. We opened accounts as 13-year-old girls in 4 different countries, and we looked at what TikTok serves in the first half hour. Within 2.6 minutes, self-harm content. Within 8 minutes, eating disorder contents. Camilla, we named half the accounts something like Susan. We named the other half something like Susan lose weight. The algorithm recognized that that was a vulnerable person, and they got served 12 times as much self-harm content in the first 30 minutes after opening an account. Now, that is outrageous. If anyone came up to a child and said to them, you know what, you're too fat, a 15-year-old child, and said, you're too fat, you should go on a 500-calorie-a-day diet. You see how free that speech would be. These platforms do it to thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids, thousands and thousands of times. And as we found in Ian's case, that eventually it normalises the idea that if you hurt inside, you hurt yourself outside, that you're disgusting, that your body's not good enough, that you should go on a diet that will end up killing you. How on earth is that about freedom of speech? And for anyone, any minister who knows these things, we debated this for years in Parliament. I first gave evidence on this in September 2021. I was the first witness for the Online Safety Act. And 2023 it was promulgated and it was given royal assent. At this point, there can be no excuse for anyone saying that the United States, if it seeks to neuter our online safety legislation, is not harming our children.
Ian, briefly, your response.
I don't really know how to respond, except we must do something quicker. We were we'd taken the first important steps. We'd taken those first important steps. Royal assent was granted in October of 23. The Act wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And it stalled. And if the government listens to Trump and his apparatchiks and the Vice President, rather than the people of this country, then something is wildly wrong with our politics. So I'd urge them to do something about it, and do something about it soon.
Thank you to all of you for those very powerful comments.